Need psychotherapy online or in person? Check out tinyurl.com/THT psychotherapy. The George Brassey Podcast is made possible with funding provided from Brassey Global Strategies, LLC, a leading political consulting, public policy, government affairs, and research firm. Are you interested in running for elected office? Need advice? Call or email George, 708-769-5015. Brassey Global Strategies 1@gmail.com.
Before we get to the interview, I just want to tell you about our newest sponsor, Union Signs and Printing. Union Signs and Printing is a union sign shop located near Chicago, Illinois, that specializes in the production of corrugated plastic lawn signs used in applications ranging from political and election usages to unions, schools, and businesses. They also produce a vast array of other products, including American-made, union-printed t-shirts, banners, bio cards, literature, door hangers, business cards, and trifold. Get a hold of Union Signs and Printing at 815-740-1688 or find them on the internet at unionsignsandprinting.com. And don't forget to tell them you heard about their services on the George Brassey Podcast. I'm so glad to welcome Mayor Jonathan Vanderbilt from the Village of Park Forest to the podcast. Mayor Vanderbilt, thanks for coming on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Alderman Brassey.
Mayor Vanderbilt, can you tell the listeners a little bit about who you are and who you were before you became the mayor of Park Forest?
Absolutely. So born and raised in Park Forest, grew up here, went to Rich East High School, was Mr. Rich East my senior year. I was adopted by the Vanderbilts at a month old. God was just in my life at an early age, and it was just a blessing to be adopted by the Vanderbilts. And yet early on, when I was about 12 years old, I got to meet my biological grandparents. And that was really an eye-opener to realize that I've got to know who my biological family was, at least my mother's side. And really got to learn about my biological grandfather and grandmother because it also helped shape my belief system, because my great-grandfather was put into a Japanese internment camp during World War II. He was married to a Dutch-Irish woman. From all accounts, she was a drunk. My grandmother still remembers her just drinking and yelling. My grandmother had 3 brothers. The war breaks out. My grandmother remembers the mom leaving and then stuck with the 3 boys. And as the war continues, she remembers that 2 of the older boys turned to alcohol. And then when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, the government decided that a single father of 4 children, that all 4 children should be put into foster homes. And my great-grandfather was put into an internment camp. After the war, he was released, and only his daughter was reunited with him. They moved to Chicago. And
what was it like for you to meet the biological relatives, and what brought that process on for you? Do you remember back then?
Yeah, so I was 12 years old. I had always been told I was adopted. My cousins, jokingly would always say, "Oh, you're going to be bad. You're going to get returned." And whenever my sister would hear that, she would start screaming at them. And because what happened is the Vanderbilts, they'd already lost 4 children before they adopted me. And so there was 2 of them made it after birth. One was about 9 months. One was about 3 months. One was a stillbirth. And then one died at about 7 months in the womb. And the doctor said, if you try to have another one, it will kill you. So my my adopted mom and dad, Julie and Mark Vanderbilt, they had different blood types. And so my mom still says to this day that all 4 children would have survived if it would have been for today's technology. So I've always been told I was adopted. And told who my biological grandparents were. So my biological grandfather is a traveling gospel illusionist. So he goes around to different churches and tells the gospel of Christ using illusion and magic. And so he came to our church at Sauk Trail Baptist Temple in Richton Park, and became good friends with our pastor. And my biological mother wrote a letter to whoever would be my adopted mother. And my adopted mother, Julie Vanderbilt, kept that letter. And we were at church. I'm still a baby. And all of a sudden, this pastor who's been doing the gospel illusion magic tricks becomes good friends with the senior pastor at Sauk Trail. And he comes more often. And all of a sudden, he's there for a revival service, which is like a 3 to 4 night service. And during this revival, he starts getting really personal, talking about things about his family, about his daughter, who had, when she was 18, had to make a choice in life and decided that life was more important than death. And so because she decided to let me live and put me up for adoption, he was telling these stories at church. My mother, Julie Vanderbilt, pulls the letter out, and literally this pastor is almost saying word for word what's in this letter. So after the service, my mom takes me up to him and says, "I think I have your baby." He blows it off from all accounts. And my grandmother and Julie Vanderbilt and Joan Peel are standing next to each other. And Joan says, "I don't know why you came up here. We're sorry for bothering you." And then all of a sudden she looks and she sees my Japanese grandmother walking across from the other side of the chapel, takes me out of my biological mother's hands and says, "You have my Samuel Herb Braille," which was my biological birth name, which was never mentioned in that service. And so at a young age, my adopted family and my biological family were at one. And so right around 12 is when I was told, "Hey, those grandparents you call Brailles? They actually are your grandparents." And I actually that day got to go and play with 2 of my half brothers. And so that was a great day. But like I said, it's just a blessing to be able to know who my adopted family is, while at the same time having a relationship with my biological family.
When do you start to develop the interest in the Village of Park Forest and its politics?
Oh, so when I was in high school, I had 2 teachers, 2 mentors. So I did football, wrestling, track, previously mentioned. And my coaches, one of them was a previous trustee of Park Forest, and the other was the first African-American mayor of Park Forest's son, Ron Bean. And they were my football coach, my mentors. And when, by all accounts, I was going to go work in the factory in Chicago Heights with my grandfather, worked where my dad worked. And then something changed that course and trajected me to show that God had something different for my life. And so my junior year, we go down to Pontiac, Illinois. Now, I don't know if anybody passed the prison first. And our coaches, they're telling us this isn't Park Forest. This isn't the south suburbs. Where we're going is going to be a different lifestyle. Now, I visited Fairbury before, but when we got off that bus in Pontiac, the first time in my life I had ever seen pure hatred in someone's eyes because of the race of someone else's skin. We get off that bus, and it was the first time I had heard the N-word used in a term of hate just because of someone's skin. We get off the bus, and trash starts getting thrown at us. And we just walk onto the field. As we're walking, we're getting off the bus. There's 2 buses of us. And we get into the field. Nobody's allowed in yet. We've already had trash thrown at us. And we start warming up. Our cheerleaders, they start warming up. And if you ever been to a football game, the cheerleaders stay on the track, right, George?
Right.
So the crowd starts coming in. We're warming up. All of a sudden, we start hearing our sisters screaming. And we turn around, and the crowd has thrown pop, balloons filled with whatever, and just any garbage that could. And we turn around, and my sisters, our cheerleaders, are covered head to toe in filth, mud, pop, dirt. We literally had to bring them off the track and in front of us, and we literally pulled the whole team. We had to cover them. They got undressed, put into regular clothes, and then they stayed right with us on the sideline. Game hasn't even started yet. So coaches tell us, okay, guys, this is what we talked about. You got to be prepared. So we get out there, and it's first play of the game. All right, game's going. We get a first down. Right when that first down happens, what do you think gets thrown? A flag. That whole first half, anytime we'd get close to getting a first down, we get shut down by the referees, not by the other team. Albeit, the whole time, that team is saying, why are you blocking for your quarterback N-word? Why are you letting your other lineman, you should be an all-white line? And I'm like, what? I'm the center, and I'm hearing this from the other team on the defense. But the offense is doing that to our defense. So the whole first half, it's not really violent, but it's just language and intimidation and hatred. So we come out, first half ends, and our coaches say, okay, this is what we talked about. We're not going to win this game. We're down 2 touchdowns, 14-0. The crowd's not going to help us. The referees aren't going to help us. You need to hold your head high and play the game. Okay, Coach Bean. Okay, Coach Gerritz, former trustee, son of a mayor. First half happens. It's over. Come out, second half on offense. My black quarterback, who I grew up with, Marcus Poston and Jason Long. It was a quarterback pitch. To this day, I still remember it. My quarterback pitches the ball to the running back, and a linebacker and a lineman go directly at the quarterback. They take him to the ground, and they literally start ghetto stomping him with cleats on, full on, just trying to destroy him. We go over, we break it up. No flags are thrown. Next play, coaches call the play in. It comes in. Okay, we're going to do a pass play. We're going to stop that. I'm like, no, we're doing the next play, except you're going to hold that ball, and we're going to kill those guys. And we're going to show them that you don't get treated like that. My black quarterback says, no, John, that's not the play that was called. And I was the center. I said, no, this is the play we're going to do. And all of the linemen agreed with me. The rest, everybody saw what happened to my quarterback. And they said, okay, we're going to run the play. All right. And the play is we're going to hit those guys and we're going to make them hurt. So we snap the ball. My 2 linemen to my right, my guard and my tackle, they take out the lineman, and I go for the linebacker with the other guard next to me. I grabbed that guy's face mask to this day, and I stuck my finger as far deep as I could in that guy's eye socket. And I just remember pummeling him. Flags are getting thrown. And the first person to grab me off the pile, Marcus Poston, grabs me by the face mask, rips me up into the face and says, John, this isn't your fight. What are you talking about? This isn't your fight. No, they hurt you. You're my brother. He said, no, John, this isn't your fight. You just talking about. This is bigger than that. He said, no, John, this is bigger than that. You fought my battle when I asked you not to fight the battle. And right there in that time, I didn't realize it right then, but now I see that moment in time changed my whole thought process on why I was meant to be here in life. And so really changed the trajectory of how I looked at myself, how I looked at the faith that I've been grown up with. and really how I looked at my community and known that Park Forest is just a unique and beautiful place that is not like anywhere else in this world. The uniqueness where all growing up, there was Mexicans, blacks, white, Asian, and we had a unity that I still don't see in a lot of other places in the world. And so it's just that experience helped me understand that we have got to step up for each other and care for one another. And so that is what changed my trajectory of what public service is about.
Mayor Vanderbilt, when do you decide that you're going to run for trustee initially?
So after that experience, a lot of the teachers even kind of surrounded me and said, all right, John, you know that you've got to do something bigger. And so really, that's when I started getting more into politics, into history. And I always loved history. So that's when I really started getting into politics, though, and to understand how politics shape policy and how that policy changes your environment. And so the former trustee, Matt Gerritz, Ron Bean, the former son of first African-American mayor, really started saying, if this is what you believe, then it's time that you follow through those things. And so they really encouraged me to go to college. They helped me focus more on my studies. And really that's where right around my senior year is where I decided that I wanted to be an elected official. Not at a local level until I got to college and realized that the dual party system, and this was in 2003, that the dual party system has really corrupted both sides in Illinois. And if you can't honestly say that both sides have corrupted Illinois, then I couldn't have a good conversation with you. And so I quickly learned that politics has two different meanings. There's the politics of the local level, and there's the politics of the higher ups. And so that's where I really fell in love with local politics. And I don't like to say politics at the local level, because it's at the local level, it's more about service being provided to our residents. And it shouldn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat, white, black, all the services should be the same no matter what. And that's where I really fell in love with local government. In college, where it's not about politics, it's just about service. And so I'd say right about college, where I realized I don't want to be a state elected official. I want to be the governor. I want to make a change in my community in Park Forest. And I came home from college in 2007, and I ran for trustee. I didn't like what I was seeing. We had a changing community. When I was in middle school, it was like a 60-30 white to black. I came back from college. It's now 60-30 black to white, which is okay. But the community services weren't being changed to a black community. So growing up, an example is I remember we had some of the best baseball fields in every park. All right. Come back from college. Why don't we have basketball courts in every park like we used to have baseball fields? And I was told, well, that causes too many fights. And then I said, well, I remember growing up when grown white men would fight at the T-ball, or grown white men would fight at a baseball game. So what's the difference if grown black men fight at a basketball game? And that didn't go over too well. And that's not always politically correct. So 2007, fresh out of college, I wasn't politically correct. Didn't get elected, but I then got on the Recreation Parks Advisory Board, tried to make a change there. Still was kind of meeting some resistance about changing our programming to the new demographics of our town. And then ran for trustee in 2013, lost. 2015, lost. Then 2017, I ran again. After 2016 was a very tough year for our community, for our family, and for our church. In 2016, for a community, we saw Tim Jones shot in the line of duty. Still working today. Detective Jones is still every day doing rehab, 8 hours a day. So we had Officer Jones shot. And I grew up with a lot of our police and a lot of our fire in town. And so that hit close. And then our church had two young men. One was 15 years old and the other was 18. The 18-year-old got an inheritance. He was adopted, got an inheritance from his family right when he graduated. And he thought he could make some money. And so he went out, bought some drugs. Where he bought them at, the person who he sent to left him out there, and he got jumped out in the community about 15 minutes away, and somehow managed on a Sunday morning, beaten and bruised, to break into his uncle's house, steals his uncle's gun, and on a Sunday afternoon in Park Forest walks to this 15-year-old's house who told him where to go to get the drugs, lures the kid out of the house. They have an argument, and the gun goes off and kills him. So one of the kids that I helped mentor at our church murdered someone in 2016. He didn't get tried until 2020 in the Cook County jail system. That's a whole nother story for a whole nother day. But the Cook County jail system is meant to keep the perpetrator in the system as long as possible. And I've seen it firsthand, but that's another time. And then another gentleman in 2016 was a 15-year-old. He broke up a fight at Rich East High School on a Thursday between his friend and a gang member. That Saturday, he's walking home to his house on a Saturday night at about 10 o'clock at night, about 100 feet from his house in Chicago Heights and Beacon Hill, and he was murdered and executed. So 2016, our church, those two church members of ours, young kids, our church says, is it time to move? Are we really being relevant to our community? Are we really making a change? And so in 2016, our church decided it was time to step up. We're not leaving here. God has put us here. Sauk Trail Baptist Temple started as Mohawk Baptist Temple out of Mohawk School in Park Forest in the 50s. And so our church really said, no, God has brought us here to be for this moment in time. And so we settled down. We doubled down on our efforts to reach the youth. And with that, our family decided that we're going to be staying and we're going to be helping create this movement. And so in 2016, we said, you know what? It doesn't matter. It's time to move forward. And so 2017 comes and I was considering not running again. And literally the community and outpouring said I had to run. 2017, I get top vote getter. And that night after election, I still won't forget it. I was getting phone calls after phone calls. All right, John, you've been in that budget long enough. It's time to become mayor. What? 2017? No, I'm not going to be mayor. In 2019 were the next elections. I had pastors, I had residents, coaches reaching out and said, we need you to be our next mayor. John Ostenberg is retiring. He's done a great job for 20 years, but he was retiring. And I was asked to run. 3 votes. I had to go to court, and there's some challenges to the votes, and so learned about that. But it's just been a blessing. So that's how I got to become mayor.
What are some things that you want to share about your first term in office as you start thinking about running again for your second?
I never knew a food desert would actually mean something. You know, you always hear, oh, this community is a food desert. That community is a food desert. Well, when Park Forest is a community of 22,000 residents and doesn't have a grocery store, when a pandemic hits, that word means something. Thinking back of how bad the pandemic was on Park Forest and just the entire nation. With being a food desert, I had senior citizens calling me, begging me, I can't leave the building. I haven't eaten in 3 days. I had parents calling me, we can't get any baby food for our kids. We can't get out. One's husband's working, the other one couldn't leave with the kids. I had residents who had elderly parents who couldn't get out because they were working and they couldn't get to their parents because they weren't allowed in the building to see them. Even my grandparents, I couldn't, when we were trying to visit them, it was window visits. So during the pandemic, the food desert really meant something. And so from that, we had a group through Southland Voice who had already been doing food giveaways with our seniors and with our veterans. And when the pandemic hit, we had already been giving away food to veterans and seniors. And so with Southland Voice and a few other partners, we were able to start providing food giveaways in the South suburbs. We did food giveaways as far north as the city of Chicago, as far west as Joliet, as far east as St. John, and went all the way down to Kankakee. We would bring groups of volunteers of 15, 20 people, and we'd go to these communities and we'd hand out food. And it was a blessing to see how God used the relationships in my life for the pandemic. So we're in the pandemic under a statewide disaster declaration, and it's the summer, and a tornado hits Park Forest. Never in a million years would I think that we'd be under now 2 disaster declarations in the village of Park Forest, one for the pandemic and one for the tornado that came through town. Luckily, there were no sustained injuries or deaths, but still just the thought of being under a double disaster declaration never would have crossed my mind. And just to see, though, how God used every relationship in my life to help those around me and help the community get the basic services they needed.
What are you hopeful for in your second term?
So Park Forest still has the highest property tax rate in the state of Illinois. And I remember this daily. And so for us, it's been great to see the economic development that's coming to our industrial zone. It's great to see some of the businesses. So 10 years ago, Park Forest, the downtown was a ghost town. Nobody wanted to go there. Teens try to like hang out in places. Teens didn't even want to hang out in downtown because it was that bad of a ghost town. And so we are finally seeing a renaissance in downtown Park Forest again, to where we're at a 94% occupancy rate of businesses. 10 years ago, it was at about a 45%. And with those new businesses, we're seeing growth of smaller businesses keep growing to grow into some of the larger storefronts. 2 of those examples would be Dolce by Dory. It was started out of a culinary incubator here in Park Forest, and she grew to a brick and mortar of about 300 square feet. Now she's at 900 square feet. We had another gentleman and his wife, Rick Nesco. They started the first Black-owned winery in the state of Illinois. He started out with a little storefront, 300 square feet. He now has over 1,500 square feet and has the best wine selection. I'm not a big wine drinker, but it's got an amazing wine selection. And once again, it is the only Black-owned winery in the state of Illinois right here in Park Forest. So there are some great things happening on the horizon, and we just have to keep focusing on the forward momentum.
Mayor Vanderbilt, our last question is always, what are 2 books that you'd recommend to the audience and why that have been important to you, and why?
So one of those books is the book of Nehemiah, and that's out of the Old Testament. And the book of Nehemiah is important to me. We named our youngest son, who's now 3 years old, as we're going on to the 3 years of term of election. My wife, we lost our first child early on. And so it's always kind of been a focus on ours to always remember our kids and try to always have them as part of our family. And so the reason I started reading the book of Nehemiah was because if I was going to become mayor, I wanted to know how Nehemiah rebuilt his city, how he rebuilt the walls, how he gave people jobs, how he inspired others to rebuild Jerusalem for God. And so if I was going to become mayor, I needed to be ready to rebuild my community for God. And so I dedicated our youngest son, Nehemiah Thomas Vanderbilt, when he was born. And so the book of Nehemiah has been a huge inspiration of how I need to be a leader in my community. And then the second book, jokingly kind of, my My youngest son just showed up. He's right next to me right now. The second book that I would recommend right now and that I've been reading is The Long Shot by Craig Hodges. It's the triumphs, the struggles of an NBA freedom fighter. And if you don't know Craig Hodges, you need to get his book, The Long Shot. He was a member of the 1991 World Chicago Bulls. He grew up here in Park Forest, Chicago Heights. I went to high school with his two sons. But his story is a story of encouragement that a lot of our young kids need to read, especially some of our young Black and minority kids, because of what Craig Hodges stood up for when others weren't speaking up for social justice. So those are the two books that I'd recommend right now.
Mayor Vanderbilt, if somebody would like to learn more about you or get in contact with you on the internet, how would they do that?
So I've got a website. It's www.johnvanderbilt.com. You can also send me an email at jvbilt77@sbcglobal.net.
Mayor Vanderbilt, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
No, thank you very much, George. I appreciate it. It's been a blast.
Take care.
Bye. How was that?
Help George stay on the Chicago Heights City Council. Go and donate today at tinyurl.com/AldermanGeorge 2023. Need more George? Like his pages on Facebook. Friends of George Brassey PAC, Fifth Ward Business Alliance, Chicago Heights Bicycle and Pedestrian Resource Center, and the George Brassey Podcast.